The dining room glowed with soft light from the chandelier Rachel had picked out last spring. It was supposed to be a celebration. Ethan, my son-in-law, had just been promoted to senior manager at a local marketing firm. Rachel had roasted a rosemary chicken, Sophie and Liam had set the table with care, and I brought a bottle of Chardonnay as my contribution. I told myself I was here to celebrate, but deep down, I knew I was also here out of habit. For years, I had been the silent safety net that kept this household running smoothly. The meal began pleasantly enough. We talked about Sophie's art project at school and Liam's basketball practice. But it didn't take long before Ethan steered the conversation, as he always did, back toward himself. "Promotion feels great," he said, swirling the wine I had brought. "Finally, all the hard work is paying off. No more depending on other people. It feels good to know I earned every bit of this." His eyes flicked toward me when he said it, as though his words carried a hidden barb. I set my fork down slowly, studying him. Rachel forced a small smile and reached for her glass of water. I knew that look. She was already bracing herself. Ethan leaned back in his chair, one arm stretched along the backrest like he owned the whole table. "You know, Linda, it must be strange for you now. Retirement, no more deadlines, no more real responsibilities. Just existing." He laughed, a low chuckle that made my stomach tighten. "Doesn't it feel like you've slipped into irrelevance?" The table went quiet. Sophie poked at her mashed potatoes. Liam looked from his father to me, confusion clouding his face. Rachel cleared her throat, murmuring, "Ethan, that's not—" But Ethan was on a roll. The wine had loosened his tongue. "I mean, let's be honest. You had a decent career as a teacher, sure. But that was what? 25 years ago? The world's different now. Faster, sharper. It takes younger minds to really succeed. Real men and women provide for themselves, not by clinging to outdated ways of life." Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for her napkin. "Mom had a wonderful career. She inspired hundreds of students." Sure, Ethan waved dismissively. "But when was the last time she did anything meaningful? Built anything new? Let's face it, living off a pension isn't exactly contributing to society." Sophie looked up suddenly, her voice small but steady. "Grandma built my treehouse last summer, with her own hands." I smiled at my granddaughter, my heart swelling with pride. "That's right, sweetheart." Ethan gave her a condescending pat on the shoulder. "That's cute, Sophie, but we're talking about real accomplishments. Providing for a family, putting food on the table, that's what counts." He lifted his glass toward me again, smirking. "So tell me, Linda, how does it feel to be, well, basically a burden?" Rachel gasped. Liam's fork clattered against his plate. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. My daughter whispered, "Ethan, please." But I didn't flinch. I had been silent for too many years, biting back the words I wanted to say. I looked straight into his eyes, my voice calm but sharp as glass. "How does it feel, Ethan?" I asked evenly. "To know that this so-called burden won't be paying your bills anymore?" The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Rachel's hand flew to her lips. The children stared wide-eyed, trying to understand what had just been unleashed at the table. I picked up my water glass, took a deliberate sip, and set it down with precision. The silence was so thick, it felt like a storm cloud had descended over us. Outside, I could hear a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. After a long pause, I pushed my chair back, folded my napkin neatly, and kissed Sophie and Liam on the forehead. "Dinner was delicious, Rachel," I said softly. "Thank you." Without another glance at Ethan, I retrieved my coat from the hallway closet. My daughter's eyes followed me, wide and uncertain, while Ethan sat rigid, his earlier smirk completely gone. I stepped into the crisp evening air, the March chill biting at my cheeks, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. Not because the burden was gone, but because I had finally decided I would no longer carry it alone. The drive home was silent except for the hum of my old sedan, a 10-year-old Toyota I'd chosen precisely because it was reliable and affordable. A sharp contrast to Ethan's shiny black SUV parked in their driveway, the one I had quietly co-signed for when the dealership wouldn't approve him a loan. When I pulled into my own modest driveway, the motion sensor light flicked on, casting long shadows across the front steps. Inside, my house felt smaller than usual. Tidy, but quiet, like it was holding its breath. I hung my coat in the closet, slipped off my shoes, and headed straight for the study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper. Against the far wall stood the filing cabinets I had kept since my teaching days, each drawer labeled neatly with dates: 2009, 2012, 2013, 2016, 2017, 2020, 2021, present. I sat down at the oak desk that had belonged to my late husband, Michael. Its surface still bore faint scratches from years of grading papers and late-night budgeting. I pulled open the first drawer. Inside were color-coded folders. Blue for mortgage assistance, green for auto loans, yellow for school tuition, red for medical expenses. My fingers trembled slightly as I spread the documents across the desk. The first slip was from March 2009, 2 months after Michael's funeral. Rachel had called me in tears back then. "Mom, we can't make the mortgage payment this month. Ethan's hours got cut." I'd written a check for $2,500 without hesitation, telling myself it was just temporary. 6 months, maybe a year. But 6 months became a year. A year became 5. The pattern etched itself in ink and numbers across thousands of pages. Mortgage assistance alone, $2,500 every month for 180 months. My calculator blinked back $450,000. I flipped to the green folders. Car payments. Ethan's SUV, Rachel's minivan. At least $700 a month for nearly a decade. Another $84,000. The yellow folders were the heaviest. Sophie's private school tuition, Liam's basketball camps, summer art programs, music lessons. Receipts piled up like a second mortgage. Roughly $22,000 a year for over 10 years. My chest tightened as I totaled it. Close to $220,000. Red folders came next. Hospital co-pays for Sophie's broken arm, Ethan's dental surgery, Rachel's therapy sessions after her miscarriage, insurance premiums during the years Ethan was between jobs. Another $120,000. And then the extras, tucked behind envelopes. Airline tickets for their vacation to Florida, ski lodge rentals in Vermont, the down payment on their kitchen renovation. Gifts I had offered quietly, telling myself family came first. Another $100,000. I leaned back in Michael's chair, the numbers swimming in my vision. My calculator flashed the sum, $974,000. Nearly $1 million. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the tidy columns of numbers that represented my quiet generosity. I thought about the life Michael and I had once dreamed of. After retirement, we would travel through Europe, take cooking classes in Tuscany, rent a small cottage in Ireland. I had collected brochures back then, neatly stacked in a drawer, waiting for the right time. Now the edges of those brochures were yellowing with age. Instead of river cruises and cooking classes, I had spent the last 15 years writing checks. Instead of seeing the world, I had seen tuition receipts, mortgage statements, and dealership contracts. I glanced at a photo on the bookshelf. Rachel at 8 years old, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera as Michael held her on his shoulders. Back then, she had looked at us like we were her whole world. When did that change? When did help become expectation and expectation become entitlement? I rubbed my temples. exhaustion pressing down on me. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I had sacrificed my own dreams not for gratitude, but for silence, for peace. And that peace had curdled into resentment the moment Ethan opened his mouth at dinner tonight. The words echoed in my head. How does it feel to be a burden? I reached for a notebook and began writing. Mortgage, $450,000. Cars, $84,000. Tuition, $220,000. Medical, $120,000. Extras, $100,000. Total, $974,000. I underlined the number twice. Nearly $1 million. My throat tightened as I whispered aloud, as though Michael were still sitting across from me. I promised you I'd take care of Rachel. I thought I was keeping her secure. But all I did was make her dependent. The clock struck midnight. I closed the folder and locked the drawer, my decision forming with every tick of the second hand. Tomorrow, the automatic payments would stop. Tomorrow, the burden would no longer be mine alone. I turned off the desk lamp, the study falling into shadow. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of freedom, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Sunday morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen blinds as I poured myself a cup of coffee. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the house itself knew change was coming. My study door was already open, and the stacks of folders and receipts from last night seemed to sit in judgment, daring me to follow through. I carried the coffee to the desk and opened my notebook. On the first page, written in bold strokes from the night before, were the words, mortgage, $450,000, cars, $84,000, tuition, $220,000, medical, $120,000, extras, $100,000, total, $974,000. I drew a line underneath and wrote, no more. The phone sat beside me, its keypad gleaming in the morning light. My fingers hovered for a moment before dialing the first number. First National Bank. The account services representative answered on the third ring. Good morning, thank you for calling First National. This is Brian. How may I help you today? I swallowed, then let my voice come out steady. I need to cancel all automatic payments from checking account 2245 to the account ending in 8791. Of course, ma'am. May I verify your identity? For the next 15 minutes, I spelled my name, rattled off my social security digits, confirmed my mother's maiden name. Each step felt like dismantling a tower I had spent 15 years building. Finally, Brian said, those payments are now canceled. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? No, I said. That will be all. Thank you. I crossed out mortgage in my notebook. Next came the insurance company. That call required a supervisor and 3 transfers. Yes, I want to cancel the premium payments tied to Rachel Dawson and Ethan Dawson. No, they will not be covered under my policy anymore. The BMW dealership was less polite. After a long hold, a clipped female voice came on the line. Mrs. Green, without your automatic transfers, the Dawsons will be responsible for $689 per month plus insurance. Are you certain you wish to cancel? I am, I said, effective immediately. My pen scratched across the notebook. Cars, canceled. By mid-morning, I was deep into the school tuition accounts. Yes, this is Linda Green. I need to terminate recurring tuition payments for Sophie and Liam Dawson. As of today, all financial responsibility transfers back to their parents. Please send future invoices directly to Rachel and Ethan. The woman on the other end paused. Ma'am, the Dawsons' children attend on prepaid annual tuition. Yes, I said evenly. Those prepayments were mine. They're finished now. Silence, then a hesitant. Understood, Mrs. Green. We'll make a note in the system. By 11 as 8 items had neat check marks next to them in my notebook. Mortgage, insurance, cars, tuition, utilities, even the private swim club membership Rachel had insisted Sophie needed. Each confirmation number went into the log. My handwriting stayed precise, but my pulse hammered with each stroke. At 11:47, my phone rang. The screen flashed. Rachel. I let it buzz twice before answering. Mom? Her voice carried confusion, not yet panic. Something weird happened. The bank called about our mortgage payment. They said there were insufficient funds. That doesn't make sense because you assumed I would keep paying it. I finished quietly. The silence on the line stretched, taut as wire. What do you mean? She asked, her voice rising. Exactly what I said last night, Rachel. I'm done covering your expenses. The mortgage, the cars, the insurance, everything. It all ended this morning. Her breathing quickened audibly. Mom, you can't just... This isn't funny. We'll lose the house, the kids' school. You'll need to figure out how to pay for those yourselves. The line went dead. I exhaled slowly, writing one more note in my ledger. Conversation with Rachel. 11:47 a.m. By early afternoon, the utilities were crossed off, the health plan canceled, the gym membership erased. Each call dismantled another piece of the invisible scaffolding that had propped up their lives. At 12:23, Rachel called again, her voice tighter, edges fraying. Mom, please. The school called. The insurance company, too. Even the electric company. They're all saying payments were declined. Because I canceled the transfers, I said simply. From your accounts? Her voice dropped to a whisper. You mean all this time? It was you? Did you think the money appeared out of thin air? Another silence, heavier than before. But we never asked you to. You never had to ask. I cut in. I just did it, and now I'm done. Her breath hitched. We can't afford it. That, I said firmly, is the point. At 12:31, Ethan's number appeared on my screen. His voice carried false authority, like a manager trying to discipline an unruly employee. Linda, whatever game you're playing stops now. You can't just cut us off without warning. No game, I said calmly. Just reality. I'm not destroying anything. I'm stepping back. If you want to know how it feels to be a failure, figure out your own bills. His silence lasted longer than Rachel's had. Finally, he spat. You're unbelievable. And the line went dead. I set the phone down beside the notebook, its pages now filled with confirmation codes and canceled accounts. For the first time in 15 years, my financial logbook was no longer about them. It was about me. Outside the window, a pair of sparrows fought over crumbs in the driveway. The world went on, indifferent. But inside, something monumental had shifted. The cords were cut. By Sunday evening, the storm had already begun to gather. I sat in my living room, with a blanket over my lap, sipping chamomile tea, while the phone buzzed across the coffee table like an angry wasp. I didn't answer at first. I simply watched the name, Rachel, flash again and again, followed by Ethan. I knew the tone of those calls before I ever picked up. Confusion turning into panic, panic turning into anger. When I finally answered, Rachel's voice cracked through the receiver, raw with fear. Mom, the bank called again. They're saying our mortgage is 2 months behind. 2 months? How is that possible? We've never missed a payment. You've never made a payment, I said evenly. That's the difference. What? She sounded like a child caught in a lie. Mom, stop. Ethan's salary? Ethan's salary never covered more than groceries and utilities. I've been paying the rest for 15 years. The line went silent. I could hear her shallow breathing, the faint rustle of her sleeve against the phone. Then came Ethan, his voice hot and booming as he yanked the phone from Rachel. Linda, this is insane. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. The mortgage, the cars, the tuition, these aren't optional. You've obligated yourself to those. obligated, I repeated, my voice sharp as glass. Show me the contract where I agreed to pay your bills forever. There was a pause. Then his voice came back louder, angrier. You promised Rachel you'd help. You made a vow at Michael's funeral. I promised to help until she was stable. 15 years later, you are still not stable. That is not my failure, Ethan. It's yours. Rachel's voice came back on, high and trembling. Mom, please, the kids. Sophie has her art program, Liam's basketball fees. They'll be fine. I cut in gently. I'll see to their needs directly. But you and Ethan? No more. Her voice dissolved into sobs. We'll lose everything. Then maybe you'll finally learn what everything truly means. I hung up before she could respond. My hand shook slightly as I placed the phone back on the table, but my resolve didn't waver. By Monday morning, the fallout had spread. Rachel called again at 8 a.m., her voice hoarse from a night of crying. Mom, the electric company called. They said our automatic transfer bounced. They're threatening to shut us off in 10 days. I only murmured, then you have 10 days to figure it out. At 9:15, the school left a voicemail. We regret to inform you that Sophie and Liam's tuition payment did not process. Please contact the office immediately to discuss options. At 10:30, Ethan showed up at Rachel's office job, one she'd quit years ago but still clung to in memory, yelling loud enough that her coworkers called me later to say they'd heard him railing about me, painting me as a vindictive old woman punishing her daughter. By lunchtime, my neighbor, Mrs. Klein, mentioned she'd seen Ethan in the driveway, pacing like a man on the verge of breaking. He was shouting into his phone, Linda. Sounded like he was blaming you for everything. I only nodded, thanking her politely. That evening, another call came. This one quieter, more desperate. It was Rachel again. Mom, she whispered. I went online to check our account. Do you know how much money is actually in there? $127. That's it. We have $127 until Ethan's paycheck comes in. And even then, it's only $2,600. That doesn't even cover the mortgage. I closed my eyes, letting the truth finally sink into her voice. This was the first time in years she had spoken to me with such raw honesty. You'll need to adjust, I said softly. Downsize, cut back, live within your means. She sniffled, her voice shaking. I don't know how. That's the problem, I said gently. You never learned. Ethan's voice roared faintly in the background, muffled but unmistakable. Tell her she's destroying us. Tell her she's tearing this family apart. Rachel tried to muffle the phone, but I heard it all. And then the quietest words slipped through. Words that cracked my heart, even as they hardened my resolve. Maybe, Rachel whispered, almost to herself. Maybe we destroyed it ourselves. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to reach through the line and hug her, tell her it wasn't too late, but I knew better. Words wouldn't save them now. Only lessons learned the hard way could. I ended the call with a quiet, "Good night, Rachel," and set the phone down. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its usual calm, porch lights flickering on one by one. But inside the Dawson house, I knew chaos was brewing. Bills stacking up, voices rising, children watching with wide, frightened eyes. For 15 years, I had protected them from reality. Now, reality was knocking at their door, and it wasn't going away. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. It was late Tuesday afternoon when I heard the sound of tires screeching against my driveway. I glanced through the living room curtains and saw Ethan's SUV swing in too fast, gravel spitting under the wheels. Rachel was in the passenger seat, her face pale and tight, eyes red from crying. The slam of their car doors was loud enough to send the neighbor's dog into a frenzy. A moment later, Ethan pounded on my front door, not knocking, pounding, as though my home were another fortress he thought he owned. I opened it calmly, my hand steady on the knob. "Come in," I said, my tone cool. Ethan stormed past me without waiting for permission, his shoes tracking mud onto my rug. Rachel followed slowly, clutching her purse like a lifeline, her shoulders hunched. "You've gone too far, Linda," Ethan barked, planting himself in the center of my living room as if declaring war. "This ridiculous tantrum ends now. You're going to call the banks, the school, everyone, and you're going to restore every payment." I closed the door behind them, my expression unreadable. "No," I said simply. His face flushed crimson. "No? You don't get to say no? You've been paying these bills for years. That's the arrangement." "There was no arrangement," I corrected evenly. "There was generosity. And it ended." Rachel's voice trembled. "Mom, please, you can't just pull out like this. The mortgage, the insurance, the kids' tuition." "I can," I said softly. And I did. Ethan laughed harshly, throwing his hands up. "You think you can just cut us off without warning? That's financial abuse." I almost smiled. "If anything, Ethan, I've been the one financially abused. Quietly. For 15 years. Rachel winced, her eyes darting to the floor. Ethan opened his mouth to retort, but I lifted a hand, walking calmly to my desk. I pulled open a drawer and retrieved my notebook, the one with neat columns and confirmation numbers. "I want to show you something," I said. My voice was quiet, but the weight behind it made them both sit up straighter. I set the notebook on the coffee table and flipped it open. The pages were filled with figures, totals, and categories, every dollar carefully documented. "Mortgage assistance," I began, tracing a finger down the page. $2,500 a month for 180 months. That's $450,000. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. "Car payments," I continued, my tone clinical. "Ethan's SUV, Rachel's minivan, roughly $700 a month for 10 years, $84,000. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance flickering. "Private school tuition, summer camps, art programs, basketball leagues. $22,000 a year over a decade. $220,000. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes glassy. "Medical expenses, insurance premiums, dental surgeries, therapy sessions. $120,000. I looked up, meeting their eyes. "And extras, vacations, renovations, emergency loans, another $100,000. I closed the book with a deliberate snap. The total, Rachel and Ethan, is $974,000, nearly $1 million. The silence in the room was suffocating. Rachel's face went white. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's impossible," he finally said, his voice shaky. "We never asked for that much." "You never asked for anything," I replied. "You simply expected it." Rachel sank onto the couch, her purse slipping from her lap to the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. I leaned forward, my eyes on both of them. "Do you see now? Every vacation you bragged about, every new gadget you bought, every moment you lived like you were above your means, that was me. Your lifestyle wasn't yours. It was mine." Ethan's jaw tightened. He began pacing, running a hand through his hair. "So what, you want gratitude? Fine, thank you. There, happy?" "Gratitude isn't a performance," I said coldly. "And it doesn't erase 15 years of entitlement." Rachel's tears spilled over. "Mom, I didn't know it was this much. I thought you wanted to help." "I did," I said quietly. "At first, until helping became expected, until it was no longer a gift, but a duty in your eyes. That's when it stopped being love and became exploitation." Ethan turned sharply toward me, his voice loud again. You can't just divide the family like this. We're a unit, a team. Teams require respect, I countered. When was the last time either of you thanked me? When was the last time you treated me as family instead of an ATM? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Rachel's sobs grew louder, the sound of a woman realizing the foundation of her world was cracking. Finally, I stood. My voice was steady. I will continue to help Sophie and Liam. I'll cover their school, their clothes, their medical needs. But you two? From this day forward, you'll live on what you actually earn, not a cent more. Rachel lifted her head, desperation in her eyes. Mom, please, what if we lose everything? Then you'll learn, I said softly, what failure really feels like. Ethan stopped pacing. His bravado faltered, replaced for the first time with genuine fear. He stared at me, speechless. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cold air rushed in, lifting the curtains. You should go now. Rachel rose slowly, her movements heavy with defeat. Ethan followed, stiff and silent. They stepped onto the porch, their shadows long in the fading light. As I closed the door behind them, I felt my heart pounding, but my resolve was iron. For 15 years, they had lived on my back. Tonight, they walked away carrying their own weight for the first time. And though it terrified them, it gave me the smallest, fiercest smile I had worn in years. The unraveling came faster than I expected. By Friday morning, less than a week after the dinner that split everything wide open, the cracks in Rachel and Ethan's carefully polished life had become impossible to hide. The first sign was the car. I was watering my front garden when Mrs. Klein from across the street strolled over. Her voice lowered in that conspiratorial tone neighbors love. Linda, did you see? The tow truck was at Rachel's this morning. I felt my stomach tighten, though I kept my face neutral. What for? The black SUV, she whispered. They repossessed it, drove it right off the driveway at 7 o'clock. Ethan was out there arguing with the man, but they had the paperwork. I only nodded, returning my gaze to the rosebush. Inside, my heart ached. Not because of the car, but because I knew Sophie and Liam had probably watched through the window. Children notice everything. By noon, I had confirmation. Rachel called, her voice ragged. Mom, they took Ethan's car. Just like that. He said he'll get it back once he talks to the bank, but... Her words trailed off into silence. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to soothe her, to remind her it was only a car. But another part, the stronger part, knew this was exactly the lesson they needed. You'll manage with one car, I said finally. Plenty of families do. Her sigh was sharp, almost bitter. You don't understand, Mom. We're not like plenty of families. That, I said softly, is exactly the problem. The following week, the mortgage notice arrived. I didn't need to hear it from Rachel. My neighbor, Mrs. Klein, spotted the bright orange slip taped to their front door. She told me later, her voice hushed with equal parts pity and curiosity. It was an official foreclosure notice, Linda. Said they were 3 months behind. 30 days to pay, or they lose the house. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. At the grocery store, whispers followed Rachel down the aisles. At Liam's basketball practice, one parent pulled another aside, murmuring about the Dawsons' money trouble. By Wednesday, Rachel's pride cracked enough that she took a job at the local supermarket. I knew because I saw her myself. I had gone in for milk, and there she was, standing behind the register in a blue vest, scanning items with the kind of stiff politeness you put on when humiliation threatens to swallow you whole. She saw me before I could leave. Her cheeks flushed deep red. Paper or plastic? she asked, her voice tight. I hesitated. My instinct was to reach across the counter, hug her, tell her I was proud she was finally working. But the line of customers behind me made the moment too sharp, too public. "Paper's fine," I said softly. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Hers glistened with tears she couldn't shed. I carried the bag out to my car and sat there for a moment, watching through the windshield as my daughter rang up groceries for strangers. My chest ached, but beneath the ache, a small flame of hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of change. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. Dave, my longtime friend from the hardware store, called one evening with the latest gossip. "Linda, you won't believe this. Ethan's been down at Murphy's bar almost every night, telling everyone you cut him off. He says you're punishing the kids just to make him look like a failure." "And what do people say?" I asked. "Well," Dave chuckled. "Bill Henderson was there last night. You know, the guy who sold Ethan that SUV? He reminded everyone you co-signed the lease. Said Ethan couldn't even qualify on his own. Bar went real quiet after that." I closed my eyes, picturing Ethan's face in that moment. The same pride that had made him laugh at me across the dinner table now turning into public humiliation. The children weren't spared from the collapse either. Sophie came by one afternoon with a crayon drawing for me. Her usual cheer dimmed. "Grandma," she whispered, "are we going to lose our house?" I knelt down, smoothing her hair back. "Not you, sweetheart. You'll always have a home with me." She nodded solemnly, then pressed the picture into my hand. It was a drawing of a small house with 2 stick-figure children and a woman with gray hair standing in front. Above it, she had written in shaky letters, "Grandma's house." When she left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at that drawing for a long time. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought, Sophie already knew where safety truly was. By the end of the month, Rachel and Ethan's perfect facade had crumbled completely. The SUV was gone, the foreclosure notice still taped to their door, the whispers of neighbors louder than ever. At dinner one night, Liam reportedly asked his father, "Dad, why do people say Grandma paid for everything?" According to Rachel, Ethan shouted back, "They don't know what they're talking about." But even she admitted the anger in his voice sounded more like defeat than denial. For me, the collapse was bittersweet. I hated seeing my grandchildren frightened, my daughter humiliated. But I also knew, deep in my bones, that this was the only path forward. The life they had built on my back was gone. The question now was whether they could build one on their own. And for the first time in 15 years, the answer wasn't up to me. Rachel's new schedule at the supermarket quickly became the center of their lives. She worked long shifts, often closing at midnight, and then rising before dawn to get Sophie and Liam ready for school. When I stopped by with groceries one Thursday evening, under the pretense of visiting the children, I found her slumped at the kitchen table, still in her blue vest, her forehead resting on her folded arms. "Mom?" Sophie whispered, tugging at my sleeve. She fell asleep while helping me with math. I tucked a blanket over Rachel's shoulders. Her face looked drawn, older than her 38 years. The proud, confident daughter I once knew had been replaced by someone smaller, worn down. And yet, beneath that weariness, I glimpsed something new: responsibility. She was finally carrying the weight she had long avoided. Ethan, however, carried himself differently. Gone was the swagger, the booming voice that once filled every room. He still wore pressed shirts, but they hung looser on him, like his pride was slipping from the seams. He came home later and later, muttering about networking, when Rachel pressed him, though I suspected those nights were spent at Murphy's bar. One evening, Liam called me. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed. Grandma, Mom and Dad fight all the time now. Really loud. About money. About you. My heart clenched. What do they say? That you ruined everything. But then Mom cried and said maybe they ruined it themselves. There it was again, that fragile honesty I had begun to hear in Rachel's voice. It gave me hope, even as it broke me. The children felt the changes most sharply. Sophie stopped inviting friends over, embarrassed by the whispers at school about their family's troubles. Liam grew quieter, spending more time in his room, his basketball gear shoved into the corner. One Saturday, Sophie came to my house carrying her stuffed rabbit. She sat at my kitchen table, eyes wide and solemn. "Grandma," she asked softly, "why is everything different now? Mom's always sad, Dad's always mad. They say we might have to leave our house." I reached across the table, taking her small hands in mine. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups make choices that catch up with them later. But you and Liam will always have me. You'll never be without a home." Her lip trembled. "Dad says you don't love us anymore." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice gentle. "That's not true. I love you more than anything. That's why I'm doing this. So you can see what real love looks like. Not gifts, not money, but honesty and respect." Sophie nodded slowly, as if she wanted to believe me. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out another drawing. This one of me, standing between her and Liam, all three of us holding hands. Above it, she'd written in careful block letters, "Safe with Grandma." I nearly cried right there. Meanwhile, Ethan's unraveling grew more visible. Dave called me again one evening, his voice concerned. "Linda, I saw Ethan tonight at the bar. He looked rough. Not angry this time, just beaten. He was telling people he never really earned any of it. The house, the cars, even the vacations. Said it was all your money." "That's more honesty than I expected from him," I admitted quietly. "Yeah, but he looked like a man who didn't know what to do without his mask." At home, Rachel told me later, Ethan's anger had dulled into something else. He stopped arguing about the mortgage, about the bills. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, his head in his hands, muttering numbers that never added up. One night, Rachel called me, her voice shaking. "Mom, I worked 8 hours today on my feet for $12.50 an hour. After taxes, that's barely $100. Ethan says it doesn't matter, that my paycheck is too small to count. But it does matter. It's something. I'm trying." I closed my eyes, hearing the desperation layered with determination. "I know you are," I told her. "And I'm proud of you for trying. That's what matters now." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "I wish I'd listened to you sooner." For the first time in years, I believed her. The children, too, were learning in their own way. Liam came over one afternoon carrying a baseball glove. "Grandma," he said awkwardly, "is it true you paid for all my leagues, every season?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. He looked down at the glove, tracing the worn leather with his fingers. "I thought Dad did. He always said he worked hard so I could play." My heart ached, but I spoke the truth. "Your dad worked, but I paid. And that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It just means sometimes adults pretend they're stronger than they are." Liam nodded slowly. Then he whispered, "Thank you for all of it." That was the first time either of Rachel's children had said those words to me. They were simple, but they carried more weight than anything Ethan had ever offered. The collapse was painful, but in those raw edges of exhaustion, anger, and fear, something new was sprouting. Rachel was beginning to see reality. The children were learning the truth. And Ethan, whether he admitted it or not, was beginning to understand that his pride had been built on someone else's sacrifice. The family I loved was breaking apart. But maybe, just maybe, it was the only way they could truly come together again. It was a Friday evening when the knock came at my door. Not the sharp, entitled pounding from before, but a hesitant tap, like someone unsure if they had the right to be there. When I opened the door, Ethan stood on the porch. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked nothing like the smug man who had once toasted himself at the dinner table. "Linda," he said, voice low, "I need to talk to you, just the two of us." I stepped aside silently, gesturing him in. He sank into the armchair across from me, clasping his hands between his knees, his shoulders slumped forward. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked smaller than the room he occupied. "The foreclosure is real," he began, his voice cracking. "We've got 30 days. Rachel's working 40 hours a week at the store for barely $300 a month after taxes. I'm bringing in about $500. The mortgage alone is $2,075. We can't make it work, not even close." I didn't speak. I let the weight of his words settle in the air. He swallowed hard. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respect, about earning it versus inheriting it. I never earned any of it, did I? The house, the cars, the vacations, even the kids' schools. None of it was mine." I leaned forward slightly, my tone even. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" He looked down, his voice breaking. "I want to know if there's a way back from this. Not to the way things were. God knows that was unsustainable. But to something better. Something real." For a moment, I studied him. Behind the exhaustion, there was honesty. Not bravado, not excuses. Just a man stripped of his illusions. "You're asking the right question," I said finally. "But the answer depends on more than me." The very next afternoon, Rachel came. She was still in her supermarket vest, the name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her shoulders sagged with fatigue. "Mom," she whispered when I opened the door. "Please, we need to talk about Sophie and Liam." I ushered her inside. She collapsed into the same chair Ethan had sat in the night before, her hands trembling as she removed her name tag and set it on the table. 4 days, she said hoarsely. "That's all we have before the foreclosure is final. The kids are terrified. Sophie had nightmares last night about strangers taking her room away. Liam's been shutting himself in his room, pretending he's sick so he doesn't have to face school." Her voice broke. "I can't do this to them. Please, Mom, please help us." I sat across from her, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "What do you want from me, Rachel?" "I want my children to have stability," she sobbed. "I want them to finish the school year with their friends. I want them to feel safe again." Her desperation was raw, maternal, and real. It stirred every instinct in me to protect, but I forced myself to stay steady. "I'll help the children," I said finally. "I'll pay Sophie and Liam's school tuition directly. I'll cover their medical needs, their clothes, their activities. I'll even establish college funds for them." Rachel's face lit with hope, but I raised my hand before she could speak. "But not you," I continued firmly. "Not Ethan, not the mortgage, not the cars, not your lifestyle. Those days are over." Her lips parted, then trembled. "We'll downsize, we'll cut back, whatever it takes, but is that all you want? Just for us to live within our means?" "No," I said, my eyes locking with hers. "I want acknowledgement. I want public truth. For 15 years, I've been the invisible backbone of your life. You let Ethan take credit, let neighbors believe he was the provider. That ends now. Rachel blinked, confused. What do you mean? I want you both to write a letter to the community newspaper, thanking me for my financial support. I want a Facebook post, public, honest, admitting the truth. And I want face-to-face apologies to the neighbors you've lied to these past weeks. Her mouth fell open. Ethan will never agree to that. His pride. Then his pride is more important than his children's stability, I said firmly. And you'll lose the house. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Mom, you're asking us to humiliate ourselves. I'm asking you to tell the truth, I countered. There's a difference. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her body shaking. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her muffled sobbing. Then, in a small voice, she whispered, I don't know if I can convince him. You have 48 hours, I said calmly. After that, the offer expires. She stood slowly, clutching her wrinkled vest in one hand, her purse in the other. At the door, she turned back, her eyes red, but her voice clear. Thank you for still caring about Sophie and Liam, she said. I never stopped caring, I replied softly. I just stopped enabling. She nodded once, then walked back to the battered Honda they'd bought to replace the repossessed SUV. As I watched her drive away, I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth, dignity, and whether they were willing to fight for either. Monday morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the world. At 10:15, I saw their old Honda pull into my driveway. Rachel stepped out first, her posture weary but determined, with Sophie and Liam trailing behind her in their school uniforms. Ethan climbed out last, his business shirt wrinkled, his face drawn and sleepless. When I opened the door, Rachel's voice broke the silence. Mom, we need to accept your offer, all of it. I led them inside. Sophie and Liam curled up together on the couch, clinging to each other like they understood more than they should. Rachel took the chair she had occupied during her last visit. Ethan remained standing, hands clasped tightly behind his back, the stance of a man who knew he was on trial. Rachel's voice shook. The bank called this morning. They said foreclosure finalizes at 3 o'clock unless we pay $8,625. We don't have it. Liam looked up at me, his eyes wide. Grandma, are we really going to lose our house? I reached over, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Linda, I need to say something. He walked to the mantel, staring at the photo of Rachel as a child in Michael's arms. Then he turned, his expression stripped of all arrogance. For 15 years, you carried us. I let people believe it was me. I bragged about things I didn't earn, and I let my children think their grandfather, and now their grandmother, were just being generous instead of the truth, that you were the provider. Rachel's tears spilled. Mom, I owe you apologies too. I treated your help like inheritance, like something I deserved instead of something you chose to give. I sat in silence, letting their words fill the room. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, not their suffering, but their honesty. Finally, I spoke. If I help you keep the house today, things will be different. I'll cover Sophie and Liam's school directly. I'll handle their medical needs, their clothing, their activities. I'll build their college funds. But I will never again pay your mortgage, your cars, or your lifestyle. From this day forward, you live within what you earn. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We understand. There's more, I said, my voice firm. I want public acknowledgement, a letter to the community newspaper thanking me for 15 years of support, a Facebook post, honest and clear, and personal apologies to the neighbors you've lied to. Rachel's shoulders sagged, but she whispered, "We'll do it." Ethan's lips pressed into a hard line. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders slumped. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll do it." I stood, walking to my desk and pulling out my checkbook. "I'll call First National and arrange an emergency payment. But listen carefully. This is the last mortgage payment I will ever make for you. After today, you sink or swim on your own." As I dialed the bank, Sophie tugged on Rachel's sleeve and whispered, "Are we going to be okay now?" Rachel's voice was quiet, but steady. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be okay." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. The third Saturday of June arrived with warm sunlight streaming across my porch and the faint hum of lawnmowers in the neighborhood. At exactly 2 p.m., a car pulled into my driveway. The same beat-up Honda that had replaced Ethan's shiny SUV. But this time, it didn't look like a symbol of loss. It looked like a choice they had finally learned to live with. Sophie bounded out first, wearing a soccer uniform, grass stains on her knees, and a medal hanging proudly around her neck. "Grandma, look what I won at the tournament!" she shouted, racing up the steps. I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me all about the winning goal." Liam followed, clutching a folder. He handed it to me shyly. Inside was his report card, straight A's, and a handwritten note from his teacher praising his newfound confidence and responsibility. My throat tightened as I looked at him. He no longer carried the same shadow of worry I had seen just weeks earlier. Rachel came last, her grocery store vest gone. Instead, she wore a neat blouse, her hair tied back. "I've been promoted to shift supervisor," she said with a small, proud smile. "It's only $15.50 an hour, but it feels like I earned every cent." Behind her, Ethan stepped out, slower than the rest. His shirt was pressed, but his demeanor was subdued. He carried himself not with swagger, but with a quiet humility I'd never seen before. "Linda," he said, meeting my eyes, "thank you for letting us come today." We settled into the living room together. Sophie chattered about soccer. Liam showed off a new book he was reading, and Rachel placed a manila folder on the coffee table. "Here's our monthly budget review," she explained. "We're covering the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and the car payment entirely from our salaries. We've even started a small emergency fund." I flipped through the papers, impressed by the meticulous notes. For once, they weren't relying on me. They were relying on themselves. Ethan leaned forward. "I also wanted to tell you. We completed the community service hours the judge assigned after our apology letters. Volunteering at the food bank was eye-opening. We met families truly struggling, not just living beyond their means like we were." His voice was quiet, but genuine. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, we made thank you cards for you." She and Liam pulled out colorful sheets of construction paper decorated with glitter and markers. Liam's card read, "Thank you for taking care of us, even when Mom and Dad forgot to say please." Sophie's was simpler. "I love you, Grandma. You're the best." Tears pricked my eyes as I held their gifts. These weren't apologies fed by desperation. They were gratitude, pure and unfiltered, from children who finally understood. Rachel spoke again, her voice soft. "Ethan and I have been talking about buying a smaller house someday. Something we can actually afford without help. Maybe in 2 years, when we've saved more, we don't want to lean on you anymore. We want to prove we can stand on our own." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "That's all I ever wanted, Rachel. Not perfection. Just honesty, respect, and the courage to live within your means." The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with the sound of Sophie and Liam giggling as they spread crayons across the coffee table. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice rough. Linda, I know it doesn't undo the years of arrogance, but I want you to know, I respect you now. Not for what you gave us, but for the strength it took to finally stop giving. I studied him, and for the first time, I believed him. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they packed up their things, ready to leave. Sophie slipped her hand into mine on the way to the car. Grandma, are you proud of us now? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I looked at my daughter, who had learned the value of work, at my son-in-law, who had swallowed his pride, at my grandchildren, who had discovered gratitude. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly, squeezing her hand. I'm very proud of all of you. As their car pulled away, the evening air was filled with the sound of laughter drifting from the back seat. I stood on the porch, clutching the children's cards, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Michael would have been proud too. Not of the money I had spent, or even the firm stand I had finally taken, but of the family we had become when entitlement gave way to respect, and love replaced exploitation. The justice I found wasn't punishment. It was transformation. And sometimes, that's the sweetest justice of all.